In the serene corner of Kent, a man named Keith Collins, 54, found profound satisfaction in the simple rhythms of life. His modest three-bedroom house, purchased during a market slump in the early 90s, had transformed over the years from mere bricks and mortar into a sanctuary, his haven. His pride lay in the neat garden he had lovingly cultivated, filled with vibrant vegetable beds, fragrant roses, and a simple above-ground pool, a place to unwind while basking in the tranquility of nature. Each morning began the same. With a steaming cup of freshly brewed coffee in hand, Keith sat in his garden, a front-row seat to nature's performance as it awoke from slumber. He relished the stillness, the chirping of morning birds breaking the silence as he contemplated the day ahead. The clamoring chaos of the city was a distant memory, one he preferred to forget amidst the greenery of his peaceful existence. Neighbors had always embraced that tranquility. In Kent, people exchanged pleasantries with warmth, waving to one another from across their yards. However, that sense of community was put to the test one sunny Tuesday morning when a moving van pulled into the vacant lot next door, drawing Keith's curious gaze from his affectionate waltz among his roses. Out stepped Shirley Morgan, a striking woman with strawberry blonde hair glinting in the sunlight, clad in a tailored suit and sharp heels, an ensemble that stood starkly opposed to Kent's laid-back style. She walked with an air of confidence, surveying her surroundings with sharp, assessing eyes. Keith could hardly believe the audacity of her presence. After shaking off the initial surprise, Keith brushed the dirt from his hands. As the neighborly thing to do, he approached Shirley, a warm smile adorning his face. "Hi, I'm Keith, your neighbor. Welcome to the area." He expected friendly chit-chat in return, perhaps a shared laugh thrown in for good measure. But instead, Shirley merely waved him off dismissively, her cool tone just above a murmur. "Thanks, I guess." Keith blinked in disbelief, but decided not to take the rejection personally. Maybe she was simply overwhelmed by the move, a new start in a new place. Little did he know that this dismissed interaction was merely the calm before an impending storm. Weeks rolled on, and summer's heat wrapped around Kent like an unwelcome blanket. Keith settled into his usual routine with leisurely afternoons spent beside his pool. Life had returned to its tranquil rhythm until one afternoon, amidst the sound of birds and gentle rustling leaves, a loud knock on his front door jolted him from his relaxation. Heart racing with confusion, Keith opened the door to find two police officers standing stone-faced on his stoop. "Good afternoon, sir," one officer said. "We received complaints about disturbances coming from this property." "Disturbances?" Keith echoed, utterly taken aback. "I've been here all day, and it has been quiet as always." The officers remained unconvinced. "May we take a look around?" they asked. Though Keith had nothing to hide, the surreal nature of it all cast a shadow over his comfort. Angry thoughts churned in his mind as he nodded, directing them through his carefully maintained garden space. That's when the invisible strings tying this chaos together began to unravel. Keith had barely shut the door behind him when he overheard Shirley's voice, raised and venomous. "Do something about him. He doesn't even belong here." Keith's blood boiled. The audacity! The accusation started innocently enough, a noise complaint, but quickly escalated to something far more personal. Shirley accused him of being a homeless migrant and a danger to the community. The attack wasn't just on Keith's character. It felt like an assault on the very identity he had built over decades in Kent. Frustration swelled in him. Suddenly, his peaceful sanctuary felt like a prison. Each time he ventured outside, he could feel the weight of Shirley's lies pressing down upon him. Days turned into a blur of social isolation, while Keith watched his once friendly neighbors glance suspiciously at him, avoiding his gaze as whispers of scandal floated through the community. He felt as if he were in a whirlwind of confusion and humiliation. As the summer days faded into memory, Keith realized this couldn't continue. Perhaps he should confront Shirley directly. One evening, he spotted Shirley lingering by his rose bushes, crouched and snapping photos like a private investigator. Keith stormed outside, his heart racing. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Shirley? This is private property." Without flinching, she retaliated with a smug grin plastered across her face. "I'm just documenting the mess you've made of the place. The parish council will hear about this." Keith's hands clenched into fists, rage sparking through him. "You're trespassing. Get off my property, now." "Straighten your crown, Keith. I'm doing this for the good of the neighborhood," she retorted, her voice dripping with false concern. Keith felt a flurry of feelings, anger, confusion, and a burgeoning resolve. He realized then that reasoning with her was pointless. Shirley was not simply a difficult neighbor. She was a bully who thrived on conflict. That night, Keith made a decision. It was time to fight back. Determination coursed through him, clearing the fog of despair that had settled within. The next morning, he reached out to a local solicitor, recounting the full story. The accusations, the trespassing, the fabricated posters plastered around town. The solicitor listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to determination. "This is harassment, plain and simple. But we'll need solid evidence to build a case." Keith wasted no time. Mr. Patel, a neighbor from 2 doors down, offered CCTV footage capturing Shirley's clandestine sneak-ins to Keith's garden. Mrs. Turner, an elderly widow who had been his ally throughout this ordeal, penned a statement outlining Shirley's lies and their repercussions on the neighborhood's perception of Keith. Even the police report from the initial incident proved essential, confirming that there was noise or disturbance caused by Keith, an invaluable piece of evidence against Shirley's fabrications. With an armory of evidence assembled, the solicitor drafted a formal complaint accusing Shirley of harassment and defamation. Yet inside him surged a swell of anxiety. Filing the complaint exposed him to even more scrutiny, but protecting his dignity and peace demanded sacrifice. When Shirley received her court summons, Keith glimpsed the slightest crack in her confidence for the first time. She attempted to downplay the situation, portraying herself as the victim. But as the legal process exposed her lies, that narrative began to crumble. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Keith felt a conflicting mix of nerves and anticipation. Shirley strode into the courtroom with her usual formality, but for Keith, this was about more than winning a case. It was about reclaiming his life. The solicitor presented the evidence meticulously. The CCTV footage revealed Shirley trespassing and tampering with Keith's garden, lurking near his windows on more than one occasion. The posters and petitions she had distributed acted as irrefutable proof of her malevolent campaign. When it was time for Shirley to take the stand, her tone dripped with indignation as she claimed she was protecting the neighborhood from a so-called threat. Under interrogation, her arguments crumbled as the magistrate, a stern woman with a piercing gaze, dissected every assertion she made. "You claim to act out of concern, Ms. Morgan," the magistrate stated. "But can you produce any substantial evidence to back your accusations?" The courtroom fell silent. Shirley's bravado shattered against the impenetrable wall of truth standing before her. "Your actions have caused irreparable harm, not only to Mr. Collins, but to the very fabric of this community you claim to protect," the magistrate continued. By the end of the hearing, it was clear. Shirley's confidence had vanished completely. The magistrate ruled in Keith's favor, issuing her an antisocial behavior order ASBO. She was prohibited from approaching Keith or his property and could no longer spread further defamatory claims about him. Shirley was also ordered to pay damages and cover Keith's legal fees. As she left the courtroom, her head hung low. The air of defeat enveloped her. Keith couldn't contain the swell of victory rising in him, knowing that this was just the beginning of rebuilding his reputation and life. The court's decision sent shockwaves throughout the village. The audacious Shirley, once the epitome of confidence, had been revealed for who she truly was, and her posters disappeared overnight. The petition she started crumpled like paper in a storm. Back at the local market, Keith overheard a shopkeeper remark, "She's lucky she isn't in jail after what she did to Keith." Neighbors who had distanced themselves from him, guilty of believing Shirley's lies too quickly, began to return with apologetic hearts, acknowledging their rushed judgments. In stark contrast, Shirley's existence turned unbearable. She began to avoid public areas, for fear of verbal stones cast her way. When she did venture outside, her head hung low, her previous arrogance replaced by a pervasive air of defeat. Keith, on the other hand, gradually started to rebuild his life. His garden, a once-shelved fragment of anxiety, became his sanctuary again. Each day, he nursed the roses he had tended for years, planted fresh vegetables, and reveled in the warmth of sunny afternoons by the pool. With support from neighbors like Mrs. Turner and Mr. Patel, who stood steadfast by his side through the turmoil, Keith cultivated new friendships. During one afternoon's gardening session, he turned to Mrs. Turner and said, "You were my rock through all this. I don't know what I would have done without you." Their shared laughter echoed through the garden, breathing life back into Keith's spirit. Life didn't return to its usual cadence overnight, but it did return. Keith found joy anew in the little things: the fluttering of birds, the rustle of leaves, and the satisfaction of a freshly mowed lawn, creating neat stripes on the grass. With each passing day, the peace he fought so hard to protect felt even sweeter. The experience served as a stark reminder of how quickly tranquility could be disrupted and how essential it was to stand with conviction against injustice. In the end, Shirley had attempted to tear him down, but her actions only revealed her own insecurities and malice. Keith's victory, however, was not merely a legal triumph. It was undeniably personal. He had proven to both himself and his community that dignity, truth, and unwavering perseverance would always prevail over deceit. As he sat by his pool one sunny afternoon, sipping a cold drink, listening to the industrious hum of the countryside and the whisper of the wind through trees, Keith smiled. The storm was over. He had weathered it with strength and grace. Kent was and always would be his home, and nothing, not even Shirley, could take that away from him.